turn now to our coverage again of the Prime Minister meeting with the premiers. Finishing 2 days of meetings in Ottawa earlier today. There was a lot of talk that we heard in their media availability afterwards about separatist movements, in particular in Alberta, after there was reporting south of the border that members of the Alberta Prosperity Project, who is leading this effort, have met multiple times in Washington with members of the Trump administration. I want to bring Stewart Prest, political analyst with the University of British Columbia, back into this conversation. Stewart, thanks for joining us again. I'm sure you had a chance to watch a lot of this. Now, the Prime Minister, we were talking with Annie Bergeron-Oliver earlier, too, didn't really want to touch that question initially. I'm sure, not pleased necessarily that this kind of dominated the conversation, especially after the comments of Premier David Eby earlier. What did you make of what we heard from the Prime Minister and the premiers themselves ultimately on this topic?
Well, I think there's an awareness here that they can't really fully avoid the question, but there is also a real desire not to be appearing to be in a kind of confrontation with the United States. And so I think there's a clear desire to de-escalate what really is a potential controversy over Canadian sovereignty and a violation of Canadian sovereignty by the United States. And so the language being used that both the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta using similar language, saying they would expect the United States to respect Canadian sovereignty. And that's a good thing to expect. But in the event, we see that that's not really happening. And so there has been this requirement to make a response in response to repeated questioning.
Do you think that, again, this conversation is clearly going to continue? So again, going from here, because I will get back to the meeting in just a second, but Quebec was brought up too, right? And you had Doug Ford saying earlier in the day as well that it would be, talking about how concerning it would be if the PQs were elected in Quebec later, because they're promising and they're running on the fact that they are going to try to hold another referendum for Quebec separatism. So a lot of this talk, again, clearly diverting what I think the Prime Minister and others they tried to rescue it at a couple of different points to talk about this Team Canada approach, but this is going to continue, it feels like, to be the story now moving forward.
I think it really does expose the stakes that we are dealing with here. That a Team Canada approach, where everyone is pulling in the same direction, even if they're doing so by their own lights and in their own interests, and then those interests can sometimes be in tension with one another. That will work for the country, but the underlying problem here is that a subset of the country does seem to be interested in going in different direction, and we can't ignore those conversations, and so. Bringing that reality out into the open, I think, in the long run, will help clarify matters and will force politicians to state more clearly where they stand on these issues. But certainly, I think it is an uncomfortable place to be in, and showing just how much is at stake if the country cannot hang together on matters of economic but also political.
Did Danielle Smith do enough maybe to denounce this, Stewart, or what do you think?
I think she is really trying to still maintain some kind of plausible deniability here, even in a response talking about how she wants her delegation in Washington to raise this matter with the U.S. federal government there. The fact that Alberta is conducting its own foreign policy effectively is really not in keeping with the idea of a united Canada, a Canada with a single voice on the international stage with the United States. And so I think even there, her response is to some extent ignoring that larger reality here, that if Alberta is truly a part of Canada, if the Alberta government is dedicated to making Canada work, then they would not be making their own representations in this way constantly to the United States.
Yeah, it was interesting because she did say, I'm going to talk to my representative in Washington, and I'm going to talk to my representative necessarily in Ottawa in order to have that. So again, outside of that too, we heard talk about the oil pipeline and Danielle Smith talking about, at least at this point, maybe to Churchill or to otherwise in a couple of different projects. So for you, was there enough to feel that, it does feel like, trying to get on the same page again ahead of these CUSMA renegotiations? The Prime Minister says he's going to meet with the premiers once that review actually gets underway monthly. So was there enough for you there too to feel that there was some good coming out of this too?
Well, I think so. I think that there was a sense on the question of pipelines that the Premier of Alberta is genuinely trying to listen to objections of others. So, for instance, in saying that Kitimat doesn't sound like it will work as a destination for a pipeline here in BC, that does suggest actually that there is listening and taking on board messages that are being received. And so that kind of willingness to compromise and listen, I do think can stand the country in good stead as we continue to look for other economic avenues for the country.
Stewart Prest, appreciate your time. Thanks for jumping back on with us. I appreciate this.
Yeah, my pleasure.